Where I'm standing right now is the site of one of the more unique historical meetings of the 20th century, and while no treaty or diplomatic measure was involved, it was certainly one for the history pages. In May of 1990, right as the Cold War was coming to a close and glasnost provided more travel opportunities for those behind the Iron Curtain, General Mikhail Kalashnikov, inventor of the AK-47 rifle, met with Eugene Stoner, inventor of the M16 rifle, right here at this rifle range. In fact, the pavilion at this range was built just for the purpose of this meetup. This meeting of two Titan firearms designers was probably the most unique of its kind ever, as their creations faced each other on Cold War battlefields all over the world for more than half a century. While both Kalashnikov and Stoner have passed on, their inventions continue to shape the geopolitical world around us to this day. Now, why did these two individuals come together, and what was the purpose of this meetup? The story really begins with a man by the name of Dr. Edward Clinton Edzell, who was the curator of the Armed Forces Division at the Smithsonian Institute's Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. His goal was to create a collection of historical tapes of different firearms designers around the world as part of the Smithsonian's Video History Program from 1986 to 1992. The broader video project was to document engineers, designers, mathematicians, and individuals who had made significant scientific advancements. Edzell focused on the firearms aspect of the Smithsonian Institute's video project. This project, funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and led by Dr. Edzell, filmed 12 separate interviews with both Kalashnikov and Stoner in order to document how these two weapons were designed, produced, and manufactured. Of course, part of the production challenge was to get Kalashnikov to actually be able to travel to the United States. Well, that process started in 1972 when Dr. Edzell wrote Kalashnikov a letter via the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., asking him for a signed autograph. Kalashnikov, a little startled at getting a letter postmarked from the United States, notified authorities who were naturally suspicious, and it wasn't until about a year later that he was allowed to respond, under heavy government consultation, of course. This initial contact started what would be considered a long-lasting relationship between the two men, and they frequently wrote back and forth to each other. Dr. Edzell, who was a firearms expert, authored several books on firearms, one of the more notable ones being Handguns of the World, and in 1986 wrote the AK-47 story, which detailed the evolution of the rifle. This culminated in Dr. Edzell visiting Kalashnikov in Moscow in 1989 as part of this film series with the Smithsonian Institute. Edzell spent his time there filming and talking with Kalashnikov about the design. Now it was Kalashnikov's turn to come to the United States and finally meet face-to-face with Eugene Stoner, inventor of the M16 rifle. He did just this a year later on a trip funded by the Virginia Gun Collectors Association, who Dr. Edzell was a member of. As part of this trip, Kalashnikov was accompanied by his daughter Elena and a translator, Sasha. In May of 1990, Stoner and Kalashnikov met for 5 days at this hunting club outside of Washington, D.C. to discuss each other's inventions, get to know each other personally, eventually becoming good friends. You'll hear now from several individuals who accompanied Kalashnikov on his first trip to the United States in 1990 when he met Eugene Stoner, and several anecdotes about Kalashnikov's subsequent trips back to the United States.
My name is Ed Costello. I live in Arlington, Virginia. I was at the time the treasurer of the Virginia Gun Collectors Association and still am a member of the VGCA.
Yep. I'm Addison Hurst, who lives here. I was also involved, and I was the president of VGCA at the time all this was happening. And so Ed and I were co-conspirators, you might say, on this. Anyway, Gary, tell them who you are.
I'm Gary Holden. I'm retired now. I live in Gore. I was involved in the actual, spent a lot of time with Kalashnikov up at the club at Norva, that 5 days on the first visit. The second visit, he actually stayed at my house for about a week. So I got to know him and his daughter pretty well.
My name is Addison Wright. I'm a member of both VGCA and Norva. I am the nephew of my uncle, and I knew Kalashnikov mostly on the second visit, and also participated in one of the trips to Russia to celebrate his birthday.
The AK-47 was designed and developed by Kalashnikov and adopted by the Russian military in 1947. The development of the AK-47 was a fairly closely held secret, and I believe the only time the West got a look at the AK-47 was during the Hungarian uprising, I think in the late 50s.
56.
Right. Prior to that, we didn't know much about it. It was not produced in great number, and they never ended up in the Korean conflict. Edzell, who was the curator of the military history section of the Smithsonian Institution, had a great deal of interest in finding out more about the AK-47 and its development. But it was pretty much closed. Russia was closed to this effort. With perestroika and the opening up of the Russian Federation, of Russia, starting in the late 1980s, Edzell began a process of trying to make contact with Kalashnikov. Wrote letters, went to the embassy, and finally, about in 1988, he finagled an invitation to go to Russia, where he met Kalashnikov. He was able to take a look and examine some of the prototypes of the AK-47, which he found fascinating and exactly what he wanted to do. And then they went out at a rifle range somewhere near Moscow, not exactly sure where. And they were able to fire these guns, and Edzell ended up with a lot of information and footage. Chapter 2. One of our members, John Wallace, may he rest in peace, John Wallace was a neighbor of Edzell and heard about all of this, and he invited Edzell to come to a meeting of the Virginia Gun Collectors Association in probably early 89 or late 1988. The meetings that we had at that time were held at a restaurant, a bar, really, called Mickey Finn, not far from the Quantico base.
Main gate.
Edzell gave us a fascinating discussion of his trip to Russia, his meeting with Kalashnikov, and a lot about some of the prototypes of the AK-47. His last sentence was, "What I'd like to do is get Kalashnikov to come over here and invite him to the United States." Chapter 3. I was treasurer of the Virginia Gun Collectors Association, and we had a lot of money. Addison was the president of the Virginia Gun Collectors Association. We were both members of Norva, which was a hunting and shooting lodge up in the mountains near Strasburg, Virginia. So I went to Addison, and we talked about this, and we talked about whether or not VGCA was willing to help out. And we agreed, yes, we would. We came up with our initial donation of $2,000, which we were going to give to Edzell to help cover the expenses of bringing Kalashnikov over here. We agreed that VGCA would cover his, how do we say it, room and board. That is, we would take care of the logistics of his visit here. And we also agreed, because of our association with Norva, we agreed that Norva would be a beautiful site where this visit could take place.
That's what Ed wanted, an out-of-way place.
So there was another another factor. Edzell, as a member of the Smithsonian had a special fund and a special effort to examine creativity. What is it that makes people creative? The Smithsonian had a fund to cover the expenses of bringing creative people together and having them share their experiences. I believe they did that with the Microsoft people, they did it with aviation experts. So Edzell went to the Smithsonian and got a grant to help fund a meeting of Kalashnikov and Eugene Stoner, who designed the
M16.
M16 rifle. So Edzell took care of getting Stoner up here and took care of pretty much his expenses, and we took care of Kalashnikov. So I'm going to stop at this point. So here we are then. Kalashnikov is arriving at Dulles Airport from Russia, and Edzell is there. We were all there to meet him. Stoner showed up the next day, and we all went up to our hunting lodge in the mountains in Virginia, where for
5 days or
5 days, that is, from the 15th to the 23rd of 1980, of May of 1980, we had discussions. Edzell set up a camera unit, and Edzell and Stoner would go down there.
1990.
1990.
You said 80.
I'm sorry, 1990. Excuse me. It just seems like 1980. So Stoner and Kalashnikov, with the help of an interpreter, Alexander Morozov, whom we got to know pretty well, they would sit down there and they would discuss how, for example, how did Stoner handle the idea of the ejector? What did that work? And Kalashnikov would talk about how he designed his items, and they would back and forth, and all of this was included in about 13 hours of recordings.
Well, basically, to pick up where, excuse me, where Ed left off, once we got the logistics worked out to bring them over here, that's when the fun started, because we really did have a lot of enjoyment up at Norwood. Kalashnikov had never met Stoner and vice versa. And so they got to know each other pretty well. And we had a great deal of fun. And we took Kalashnikov hunting, and we just did lots of things up there. And they really enjoyed each other's company. And we were surprised how much they knew about. They didn't know each other personally, but they knew a great deal about each other's weapon systems. And so a lot of information. We fixed dinner, and we had lavish meals for them, and they just had a great time, and they got to shoot each other's firearms and a lot of the other weapons that the FBI donated for the cause out of the vault. And so we just had a wonderful time and got to do a lot of different things. And some of the stories sound bizarre, but they're true. They're funny. Just to give you an example, we found out later, we didn't know this at the time, but when General Kalashnikov and his daughter and their interpreter flew into Dulles, it was on a Friday afternoon, and even in those days, the traffic, terrible. You know how it is at Dulles. Well, when we found out later, he thought that we had staged that traffic jam to impress him. He was that naive about how things were done in America. It did not take him long, though, to acclimate to our way of life. He adapted very quickly, and we took him shopping. He needed clothes.
I'll talk about that.
Gary, it was funny. Some of the funny stories, but that's just to give you an example of, he had never been east of or west of Bulgaria before he came to Dulles.
Before Gary starts, I just want to give one little snippet. After we met him at the airport, we took him up to Norva right away. Actually, it was the next day, but on the way up, we stopped at McDonald's, and they had never been to a McDonald's before, and they really wanted to try a Big Mac. They'd heard about that. So we all stopped at some McDonald's along the way, and we all had milkshake and whatever. And we were getting ready to leave, and the Kalashnikov took the plastic silverware and kind of cleaned it off, and he wanted to save it because he couldn't imagine throwing that stuff away, you know?
And then
Amazing.
he wanted a pair of cowboy boots. So we took him to Apple Blossom Mall in Winchester. And we walk into this, as we're walking into this store that sold shoes and other sundry items, a high school student, young lady, couldn't be any more than 17, 18, came up to him and recognized him, called him by names that she had just given a report in her class about him. So, of course, through the interpreter, they talked a little bit. So we go to the cowboy boots, and he picks up a pair, and he turns them over, and he looks at the size, and he puts them back on the shelf. And the interpreter said, well, what's wrong? He said, they weren't his size. And we had to explain to him, no, that's a display. All the sizes are in the back. So he had to do that. And then on the way out, a reservist, young man reservist, came up to him in the middle of the mall and introduced himself, recognized him, and he through the interpreter, he said when he was in Vietnam, he would get rid of his M16 for an AK. That's how much he thought of it. So after he get done, I said, well, do you realize that we have Eugene Stoner with us too? And he said, can I come up to the club and give him a unit hat that evening, which he did. He gave him the hat, had his unit on it, and I said to him, I said, now tell Stoner what you said about the AK. He did. He told Stoner, but Stoner didn't bother him. What was interesting, Stoner got $1 a rifle. Kalashnikov got medals. Now, if you read his book, he said he was real happy with the medals, but in reality, I'm sure he'd rather had the buck a gun. Anything you can add to that?
To give you an idea of the concept or this whole size, we left 16 million M1s, M16s in Vietnam when we ran.
Yeah, Stoner had his own plane.
Yep, had his own Learjet.
And this and that and the other. Now, according to what Dr. Edzell said, that they lived high on the hog over there, Kalashnikov did, on about $30 a month. And if you go to Moscow, where he was living, Edzell, they always, if you were well off, the majority of people had a dacha out in the country, which was a lot fancier, not by our standards, but it's a lot fancier than what was in the city. They went out there. But it's an interesting way of life he had. And I know that he's tried, as the years went by, as you know, he tried to commercialize his name on the vodka. He came out with his own Kalashnikov vodka. I know he was interested and tried to make a little bit of capital. But of course, you really can't admit that to the government. You know, you're patriotic, your medals are fine, but I guarantee you, I felt that he would rather have $1 a gun than a medal. I said,
Well, different societies reward their heroes in different ways. Kalashnikov is a national hero. He's a regional icon, recognized throughout Russia, but because of his name and image. And they provided him with, as they did for most, housing. And he had a, what was his name? Aide de camp to help him out. And he was recognized, and everyone knew him. In the United States, you probably couldn't find 10 people who knew who Stoner was, because his rewards were much, much different.
But he was a rare individual. He did have a vehicle. Wasn't much of one, but he did have a vehicle.
Yes, he did, which was rare.
Yeah. Yep. And we took him down to, they took him down to this bar not too far from Norva, Four Corners. They call it the Corners. And he was out in there dancing, I heard. I stayed home. I stayed back with Eugene Stoner. What I found really, really unique was Stoner, Kalashnikov got all the attention. It's like a movie star versus you or I going in there. But he took it in stride, didn't he? It didn't bother him a bit.
No.
And so when they took him down to get him drunk, I don't know if they did or not, but Martin and I and Stoner stayed at Norva at the kitchen table, and we got talking about the M16 design. And he talked about the problems with the fouling, what happened there, and why. And then Martin said, well, why did you design the 223 when they had the 222 Remington Magnum out? He said, I didn't know it was out. So that was kind of, they didn't tell him.
Remington wouldn't tell him that they were designing the 223. So he, 222 Remington Magnum. So he went ahead and talked to Winchester and had them put together this 223 cartridge, which is the one we have now.
Another thing that's interesting, Stoner had been he worked in the aircraft industry and with precision castings and precision parts for aircraft. And he'd been working on gun designs for some time, and he'd developed a gun called the AR-10. It was like a M16 on steroids. It was big, and it was .308. It was a monstrous gun. We have one in the collection here. And the Army, the Vietnam War started to come along, and the Army found out that we didn't need a rifle as powerful as what we had in World War II. We needed a smaller gun. And so Stoner said, all right. So he downsized the AR-10, made it fit this smaller caliber, and the Army bought millions of them. So it's just kind of funny how it worked out.
And when we were up there, interestingly, an engineer came up there that was designing a new Colt pistol. Remember that?
Yep.
And he has come out with it. It didn't sell well, but he was picking Eugene Stoner's mind. He was having a problem with a certain area in it. I forget his name. I guess we should have paid a little more attention to him. But I don't know how he found out that he was up there, but he went up there specifically to talk to Eugene Stoner about that Colt.
I don't remember the name.
Remember that?
It's been a while.
But I seen the gun in the magazine not too long ago. It's a semi-automatic pistol. So it looks sort of like a 45, but not really. And it didn't sell well. It was a flop, really, if you look at compared to other guns that Colt made and sold. So it's a shame that we didn't dig into that a little deeper.
That's
There was
true.
so much going on up there; it was unbelievable.
It was chaotic.
But I don't want to go into our trip over there because that's a whole new chapter. But one of the things that he came and saw my collection, he saw a few other gun collections, and when he got up on stage with Putin and the like, he said we had an interpreter that sat behind two of us. Every two people, the interpreter was behind us. So every two people had an interpreter in the auditorium. And he said he doesn't see anything wrong with people owning guns. So we changed his mind on that. When he first came over here, I assumed he didn't think you should own a gun unless you're military. So we sort of changed his mind on that when he saw all of ours.
He told us later that he didn't believe, he thought we were all CIA agents because he said, up at the property there were hundreds of guns up there. And he said, no way would people be allowed to own that many firearms privately. He said it had to be government people. So he thought we were all, I guess, spies or agents or something.
Now, another thing too, let's talk about the guns. When the Smithsonian was getting ready to film, well, they had the M16. They didn't have, now this is up in Star Tannery, Virginia. I don't know if many people know where that is, that views this.
It's out in the woods.
It's out in the woods. They realized that they did not have an AK. So they went around on a Friday night around 8 or 9 o'clock at night.
Two strangers,
and a guy said he gave him one, but he said, I'm not going to give you the one I have buried, that it's fully functional.
which is totally illegal.
Which is totally illegal. And first thing he asked me, you're not ATF, are you? But so he gave him a beat up AK. Well, John Wallace saw it, and he made a special run, and he went down to the Quantico Museum, and they loaned him one down there for the demonstration when he would take them apart and put them back together. So that was interesting that
Right.
up there in the sticks, it came across two AKs.
Two strangers went out and in 2 hours came back with an AK. What's that tell you about gun control? That's just the way it was. It was crazy.
But he spent about 5 days up there. You really get to know him when he was a little distant at first until he realized that we weren't KGB or CIA. And he realized that he made a statement that through the interpreter, he said he'd rather be around people like us than the echelon, because I guess basically they're not as friendly, or they're phonies more or less, so they put on an act. But he was very comfortable with the local people like us, which I don't think he had much of a chance to see in Russia. Because a lot of people, I was told, think he's a myth, that he never existed. So it's interesting that he did enjoy, I guess we call us the common people, for a better word.
Well, he thought so much of us that eventually he invited all of us to come to
That's
Russia.
right.
And we went 3 times, clear to Siberia to where he lived. So we got to know him quite well, and we became close friends. Amazing, really.
Where did he sleep when he was up in Star Tannery?
The guest cabin.
Well, what we did,
Yeah.
Kalashnikov came over with his daughter Elena and an interpreter, Sasha Morozov. Well, he didn't speak any English at all, virtually. His daughter Elena spoke pretty good English. That wasn't a problem. The interpreter spoke perfect English. That wasn't a problem at all. So the interpreter stayed in the main cabin. And what we did, we made an arrangement with George Mason, who owned the West End store near where the hunting club was.
Near Strasbourg.
And we borrowed his trailer. He had a vacation trailer.
Nice.
So we moved the trailer up to
the property.
Up to the property and put it right next to the main cabin. And so we put Kalashnikov and his daughter Elena in that trailer.
No, I thought
So they stayed there.
I thought they were in the guest cabin. Stoner was in there.
No. Stoner stayed, I think, in the guest cabin.
Yeah, I think
They stayed in the trailer. I've got photographs of that.
Yeah.
In fact, the trailer is still there. There's a photograph.
Yeah, I thought that was good enough.
So that worked out pretty well. The other interesting, again, kind of snippets of this. Toward the end of the stay, I realized that we had some laundry problems. Okay, we run out of underwear, and there's no facilities up there.
Nope.
So yours truly volunteered to do a laundry run. So I got Kalashnikov's underwear.
Everything.
Everything, but she wouldn't give me her underwear. She wouldn't do that. So I took her Kalashnikov's underwear plus mine and everyone else's, and I drove over to Wardensville in West Virginia, and I sat there in a laundromat for 2 hours while all this stuff got cranked out. And then I brought it back and everything was fine. The only reason I mention that is because I do have a signed book by Eugene Stoner, and he commented that he thought I was probably the best laundryman he'd ever run into. So I do have that credit to my name.
Oh, that's funny.
But I mean, there were times like that when we had to kind of worry about,
But I want to tell you something, Ed. I was in the car with him when we rode down to Quantico. He can speak a little bit more English than we realized, because he started speaking it in the car.
I think there's another snippet that may be interesting to the people who are going to watch this is you should talk about the flagpole
Incident with the gun.
incident with the gun and its design significance between Stoner and Kalashnikov.
I was going to
Because Gary started the idea that
you want to
Stoner
Sure,
had this opportunity because he was in America to work with cutting edge design and materials and certain aspects, and Kalashnikov came from a different school of thought. I'll let you guys take
Well,
it.
it was funny because one of the questions Dr. Edzell asked Stoner specifically is, how on earth did you design a weapon that's made out of composite plastic and aluminum and materials like that would stand up to the rigors of a military combat rifle? And Stoner said, well, he said, you might find this a little hard to believe, but he said, it's true. He said, we would experiment. We tried all different materials, and they would all break and everything. He said, finally, they came up with a design that they thought was really a good material combination to use. And he said, the way they tested it, they went to Aberdeen Proving Ground. They took the flag down from the big flagpole at Aberdeen. They hoisted up a bunch of M16s to the top of the flagpole and let loose of the rope. And of course, the guns fell to the ground and smashed on concrete. Well, the ones that didn't smash, that's when they started perfecting them. And that's how they came up with the idea of trial and error. And so Kalashnikov's hearing all this through the interpreter.
Starts laughing.
And he starts laughing. Well, Edzell didn't ask the question in any pretext of being humorous, but we found out that Kalashnikov had a droll Russian sense of humor. And he said, well, he said, in Russia, or in Soviet Union, it was still pretty much the Soviet Union then, but he said they have different method. If the gun doesn't work, you take the designer up to the top of the pole and drop him on concrete. He said, you'd be amazed how much progress they make quickly. That gives you an idea of the sense of humor that he had. He was a funny, funny guy.
Yeah, he really was.
Just a great guy. But it's true. I would have never thought about dropping the guns from the top of the flagpole. But
Now, the second time he was up there in this book, he raved about the hot water in that guest cabin. So it was the second time they stayed in the guest cabin.
yeah, maybe that could be.
He didn't.
I just read it.
He didn't go to Norva the second time, did he?
Well, we're getting fuzzy and old and forgetful.
Yep.
So
I
who
forgot
knows?
about this, but what he did, one of the trips, I guess it was the second one. One of the trips, Bill Ruger invited him over, and he stopped by to say hi, us, and he wrote a book about my American friends, and the one chapter up at Norva with us, he had it was translated into English, and he gave us. We all should have one of these.
I think we
He
do.
gave us a copy of this. So, and I'm just reading through this, and there's a lot that I forgot. But he did mention that the cabin was small, but nothing fancy, but comfortable. And he was amazed up there where they were, all the hot water that they could get. So there's a real shortage of hot water in Russia, apparently. Of course, where they put us, we know that we stayed in the same hotel that Bill Clinton did at the Marriott there in Moscow. And I went to grab my bags to walk in to the door, and Mr. Moken said, no, Gary, don't touch that. They wouldn't let me carry my own bags in the door. So I guess they thought I was a celebrity or something. But it is interesting when I read this, and I haven't read it in years and years and years. I have the whole book, but again, the only part that was with us was translated into English. And you guys were given one of these too. I don't know what you still have one.
I think we have it. I'm sure we do. But one of the most interesting things when we finally got them together was, and they each got to shoot each other's weapons. And here's just one picture that we took. I don't know whether you can see this or not, but it's a picture down at our 100-yard range with Kalashnikov on my right and Stoner here, and they are shooting their own invention. In other words, Stoner is shooting the 16 Kalashnikov. We have a lot of other pictures where this got turned around and they shot each other's design.
And they also shot skeet.
Oh yeah, we have another picture here somewhere of Stoner actually up at our skeet range pulling birds, for the clay birds to go out, and Kalashnikov is shooting skeet, and Stoner is pulling birds. And we looked at that picture later and we said, how often could the two most famous firearms designers still living in the world would be pulling birds for each other, shooting skeet in a country range?
And not only that, to tell the importance of their designs is somebody asked Dr. Edzell why he didn't invite Uzi over, and he said Uzi is not as pronounced or as famous or is known for what he's done as these two guys.
But they did invite
They did
Uzi,
invite Uzi.
but he was ill. He couldn't come.
Is that right? That's why
he couldn't
come?
make it.
Okay.
Yeah, Uzi Gall was the
And then,
inventor of the Uzi.
Kalashnikov, his daughter wanted him to lay down during the day and midday, and when he would lay down, somebody would go down on the range and shoot. He'd be up and out down to the range. Remember that?
Oh yeah, yeah. He loved shooting.
What was Edzell's connection with the, I think it's the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation? I think they financed the whole trip.
That was a foundation that I guess the Smithsonian got money from, because I think they're the ones that funded the video camera crew and all that. I don't know who they were.
They may have funded the creative initiative.
I noticed the name Sloan Foundation on the video parts of the tape.
Right.
So they must have somehow been the financiers of it.
Dr. Edzell also said he went over budget.
Okay.
Remember that?
Everybody went over budget.
I'll say,
He got a little bit of hot water, so did we.
In fact, that's another story. I was the treasurer of Virginia Gun Collectors Association, and they had authorized $2,000 for this effort. Well, as you know, when we took Kalashnikov shopping, he wanted a pair of blue jeans, so we paid for it. And Kalashnikov wanted to, do something else. Well, we went to a restaurant or something, and so we were caught up in the exuberance of the moment.
You couldn't
And all this excitement.
They couldn't leave him up there hanging.
That's right. And so we just kept spending money like crazy. And I was the treasurer, so I did. And Addison was there. I wasn't He's
I was a
partially his fault.
co-conspirator, you might say.
Co-conspirator.
Yep.
And so things kind of snowballed, and the final blow came at Dulles Airport the day he was leaving. We all got him to Dulles Airport. He's starting to check in, and Morozov came over to me and said, Ed, he's got an overweight luggage. The overweight charge is $100. Out comes $100. What are you going to do? You can't leave him.
No.
So then we decided we kind of went to the bar to have a goodbye drink. Well, the champagne comes out, and there were what, 10 of us?
No, at
12
least-
of us?
at least.
I wasn't involved in that part.
And again, we're still kind of on a high, Bar bill comes, $150.
My one question was, did any of you witness when Kalashnikov and Stoner actually met for the first time? I mean, was it?
It was in Norva.
It was at Norva, but
Yeah, we were there.
Was it? Was it? How did they greet each other? Did they just go up and shake their hands, or was it anything?
I don't remember,
anything
but
special?
but of course there was a language barrier, but we had somehow we got an interpreter there, and
That was
it was probably Sasha.
Sasha.
And so it didn't take them long to warm up, and they knew each other's work so well that even though they'd never met, they were quite familiar with each other's weapon systems.
Okay.
They had studied this out very, very carefully for a long time, obviously, and so they just got along great. Just like
long lost buddies.
Just like they had been friends for years.
Yeah.
Everything was very low key, no pretense.
Right.
And one of the reasons
Being
why
yourself.
Dr. Edzell picked our club, because other clubs got wind of them up there, and Fairfax Rod and Gun Club being one of them, and they asked me why didn't they go there, which actually, as far as the facilities go, probably the best range on the East Coast, bar none. But Dr. Edzell was worried about
Publicity.
anti-gun people protesting in front of him, and so he wanted to keep it low-key, out of sight, and film it for the archives for the Smithsonian.
Because he told me specifically that the one newspaper that he did not want to have wind of this is the Washington Post.
Oh.
So the arrangement was they would wake up in the morning, and we had someone there cooking breakfast.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
It was you most of the time. And then they would go down to the range, and they set up 2 tables, one for Kalashnikov and one for Stoner. And then Sasha, the interpreter, was kind of in the middle. And so the instructions were that we up in the clubhouse, we were to shut up.
And stay, and don't go down there.
No, don't do any shooting. Don't go down there. Just stay out of the way. And we did.
Except for Matt McCamey shooting at a rattlesnake.
Well,
that's on tape.
We when in doubt, we followed instructions. Okay, so they would go down there for 2 or 3 or 4 hours and have their discussions. They'd take a break, come up and have lunch. In the afternoon, they'd go back for a couple more hours, and they did that for
several days.
At least 3 days.
Yeah, several days, and it worked out well. It really did. In fact, in the original recordings of that, you could hear birds singing in the background. It was springtime, and so
that's why it was loud. But so we didn't know actually what went on, the details down there, unless you know or we know if you watch the tape, because we were up at the lodge, and like I said, I went down there when they were setting up, and I was telling Eric they had the machine there, the camera down there, and one of the guys said, "Look," he said, "don't go around that. That's $85,000 camera." And I said, "Be my luck, I'd knock it over." So when they were setting up, once they got set up, we were gone. It was only them down there.
That's right. And then in the afternoon, after most of this was over, we did a lot of shooting, and that's where many of these photographs come from.
Yeah.
They shot my weather balloon.
Trying each other's weapons.
But the camera was gone, and the camera crew was gone.
Right.
And Dr. Edzell, anything was down there. It was just the members, a few members, a handful of members. He shot my Weatherby 7mm Rotary Magnum there, Kalashnikov did. and he was shooting some of the members' guns.
Yeah, I think some of the video was you guys had set up some milk jugs on the 100-yard range.
Yes.
And were shooting at them, and I think Gary, you were kind of it looked like a hunting rifle. I'm not exactly.
It was a Weatherby
Weatherby.
Mark 5.
Okay.
7mm mag.
Not even milk jugs were sacred, you know.
No. And you know what made it the finish the day for them? That was they'd enjoyed all this all day. They'd been dealing with people and doing things they wanted and loved. But we had worked out a schedule so that each one of us, the families, would arrange to bring dinner.
Right.
And filet mignon, we had everything was just the best, and we cooked it.
Didn't pay us anything.
No, we all paid for it, but they ate well.
Right.
And they loved it.
And we bought them gifts.
Oh yeah.
And in the evening, it was very instructive. We were, after dinner, we would engage in these various conversations. Again, we had the interpreter with us.
Right.
So he helped us out. And those evenings around the fireplace
They were great.
were instructive and very helpful. Kind of gave you an insight into each of their
2 lives. Two lives.
their accomplishments, their problems,
You know,
and a lot of background history. Having said that, I can't remember any of it. But
I remember one snippet that I'll never forget. If you've heard much about the M16 in Vietnam, there was a problem with a device they had on the side of it called a forward assist. That if you had a dirty, say you had sound in your chamber or something, and this thing would force around in the chamber.
Stoner didn't like that.
Stoner told the Army, don't do that. It's the worst possible thing you can do. And the Army did it anyway. And a lot of GIs died because of it.
Yeah.
Shame, but he told us. He said, I begged him, I pleaded with him not to do that.
the other thing he didn't like was the bayonet. He didn't want to have a bayonet on the M16 because that required strength. I mean, you know, if you're going to use a bayonet, you got to have a pretty strong system to, you know, have a 150-pound man hanging on it, you know. So, but the Army, again, insisted on having a bayonet.
He was saying they wanted a light gun, but they kept putting stuff on it to make it heavier.
So it required then that Stoner strengthen this in order to handle the bayonet. It were snippets like that that kind of helped us understand much better.
One of the things that Stoner told us was the reason the Army wanted a light rate. Remember I mentioned a while ago a scaled down version of the A-10? The reason they wanted such a light rifle was they found out that the engagements in Vietnam were under 300 yards. Right. And you didn't need a rifle that would shoot from here to Leesburg. So that was the whole thing. It was a compromise. Make it small, but then add a bayonet, do this and do that. Time the Army got through with it, it was not what Stoner wanted.
And then
and it was interesting also, they talked about the difficulty they had in designing each of these rifles.
The three-round burst.
For Stoner, what happened was he received a request or proposal from the government to build a rifle, and I'm not sure I can remember everything, that didn't weigh over 6 pounds, that would penetrate a helmet at
so many yards.
I think 600,
300 yards.
I think it was even more than that.
You know, he had all these different requirements that the Army put on his proposal. And so he had to then, you know, find a cartridge that would meet those requirements and build a gun that would meet the rest of them. On the other hand, Kalashnikov was handed a cartridge, the 7.62 by 39, and said, here, I'm simplifying this, but here, build a rifle that'll handle this. Because it was an assault rifle cartridge, which was between a rifle and a pistol, so a medium cartridge. So in a sense, Kalashnikov's chore was a bit easier because he just had to deal with one variable, the cartridge.
He didn't have the Pentagon to deal with.
That's true. Whereas Stoner had all these other requirements, plus some feisty generals who had, and keep in mind that tactics changed during this time. When I was young and handsome and in the Army, we were taught with M1 rifles to shoot accurately up to 300 yards. Okay? The idea there was that infantrymen should be able to have good control over aimed fire. The tactics changed much in Vietnam. There you had a situation where no one ever saw 300 yards,
No.
or very seldom.
Be lucky to see 100 yards.
And so the M1 rifle weighed 9 pounds and took a lot of ammunition, which weighed a lot. The AR-15, M16, much lighter. One soldier could carry a lot more ammunition.
Yeah.
So it's a different era, a different time. And Stoner adjusted to that magnificently, you know?
He was very flexible.
He really was.
Very
He's
flexible.
an amazing guy.
He really
It
is.
was interesting to talk to him not only about guns, but he was a pilot, and I worked on area facilities on the equipment he would land on. We got discussion about that, some of the problems he was running into, and I was talking to him why he ran into that type of problem. So he was knowledgeable not only on guns, but he was fine as well.
Just a quiet, nice, great person.
He was a Marine of PFC. He started off as an enlisted man in the Marine Corps.
Was he was a World War II veteran, or was that he was younger?
No, I
No.
don't think he served.
No, I don't think. No, he
wasn't
was.
that old.
He was younger,
Okay,
but
he was younger,
Kalashnikov, of course, that's the reason the AK came around. World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another whole story. But
Kalashnikov was small in stature,
Right.
and his when he joined the Army, they made him a tank commander. He was a bright guy, and they know that. So he could get into a tank and manage it. And he was badly wounded in 1941 at the Battle of Bryansk.
Bryansk, right outside of Moscow.
Right
Just outside of Moscow. And while he was recovering in the hospital,
What he's thinking about this.
that he realized that the Russian soldier was just completely outgunned by the Germans.
Right.
The Russian only had a few machine guns, and they were heavy, and the rifles were clunky.
They were shooting Tsarist era rifles.
So he started off with the idea that he had to participate in a process whereby the Russian soldier would be well equipped against a fairly advanced German army, and that's what he did. And his sense of patriotism, of love of country,
Oh yeah.
of Mother Russia, this kind of came through during his lifetime.
Yeah.
And which is one reason why he was so loved by his people. I mean, they adored this guy, you know?
Now, when he visited, did you guys talk a lot about politics? Did you guys talk
No,
about
no.
economic systems?
No, not really. Not really.
No.
We were strictly on a level
was-
of guns and gun design.
It was,
Yeah.
we were the
A
ones.
boundary you don't want to cross.
We were the ones that was observing his exposure to capitalism.
Yeah,
Right.
Keep
that's
in
really
mind, he had
interesting.
not left the Iron Curtain ever.
And he adapted very, very, very quickly.
And it was surprising.
And he didn't like Stalin.
Right.
Stalin had exiled his parents to Siberia.
Well, his parents
really?
were
Yeah.
thrown out of,
They were. And I read,
evicted. They were sent to Siberia, basically.
and his father was worked to death by the Russians in a slave situation. I mean, they were considered, if they were wealthy enough, that they would be considered kulaks, enemies of the state.
And one thing I never was able to understand and didn't really ask a lot of questions, but Kalashnikov comes across as being apolitical. I mean, you can imagine he's the son, of someone who was evicted, or sent to Siberia, and yet he had this love of the fatherland and the love of Russia. And I don't think he ever, at least on record, ever would criticize Stalin.
No.
He might have had ill feelings, which were well-founded,
Right.
but he just wasn't a political person.
Right.
But Ed Edzell
I
told me
agree.
one
I
time,
agree.
he said, Ed told me one time in conversations, do not bring up the word Stalin.
Right.
Yeah,
That's not the word he ever wanted to hear.
But
So,
having said that, he disliked Stalin, but not necessarily the politics.
Right.
He
But
didn't
what-
like the man for what he did.
and what he did to the country. So, yeah, it was a touchy subject.
Did he ever express disappointment that the Soviet Union had fallen, or
No.
again,
No.
that was probably something he didn't?
That was not something that he ever mentioned.
Now, keep in mind, that wasn't well developed by
At that time.
1990.
The
you know?
wall
I mean,
is-
that had just, perestroika and all that was just coming around. So
And the wall hadn't been knocked down.
So 1990, the Soviet Union was still.
It was still.
Existed, right?
It was.
it was
transforming, but
Well, he came over in 1990, and
Yep.
we went over in 1990. When was the first trip?
92 maybe. I'm not
Shit, I
sure.
don't remember.
Was it for the AK-47 anniversary?
Could be. Every time they had a big celebration, they
97.
That's for
invited
his
us.
birthday.
First
Yeah.
birthday.
The first time was for his birthday.
His 80th birthday?
Whatever.
And they do know how to sell. They do know how to put on a party and a celebration. I mean,
That was
They had
probably
a,
92 or 93.
Yeah.
they had a, my wife, they had a checkerboard out of caviar, red
oh yeah,
and black. Well, the black caviar.
that's the beluga. That's the good stuff.
$275 an ounce.
I think something
And
like
my
that.
Janet is just going crazy. I said, "Look, don't get hooked on that. With that, we can't afford that back home."
But they did. They fed us well.
We went there for dinner one night, and they walk into the room, and they had a banquet, everything imaginable you could eat. So I'm sitting there eating, and then after about 10 minutes, Bill York says, "Gary, don't fill up. This is not the dinner. This is the hors d'oeuvre. This is before dinner." I said, "I was already done." You know, I mean, that would have been plenty, and they put
Yep.
people come over and they dance.
The meals were sumptuous.
Yeah.
Oh,
They really were.
They were.
Substance and sumptuous.
but you cannot get a cold drink over there.
Oh, really?
You didn't look hard enough, Gary.
No, in the wintertime, I think you probably could.
No, that's what I asked for iced tea. It came. They never give me iced tea. All the bottled water was on the table warm. I asked. I said, I'll get some milk. That's got to be cold. It came out in a cup warm.
They brought the cow in.
I don't think they had ice inside the
I
building.
guarantee you, they had some in
And
the
then
summer.
when they came at the house, they did not drink anything with ice in it.
Guess that's what you're used to.
Yep. Well, it's so cold over there.
Yeah.
You know.
You mentioned when he came here, he went to a number of stores like Walmart.
Sears in
In the
Apple
mall,
Blossom
I
Mall.
remember the mall. He went. Yeah.
We had to
Tell
buy.
me about the shoes and the experience going in the back.
No,
Well, we kind of touched on that, but yeah, he said he made a joke one time to me after we went to the shoe store at Sears and Apple Blossom Mall. He said, I understand in United States that you have socks that one size fits all. He said, in Soviet Union, we have shoes that one size fits all.
He had a good sense of humor.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He did.
I think all Russians had to have that.
I think you have to accept it because they've been abused.
Yeah.
They've been abused so long that you kind of, it's a stoic, I don't know, resignation.
It's just a different system.
Yeah, it is.
But I was amazed when we walk around how many people knew him.
Yeah.
I mean, there's only one or two, but in Apple Blossom Mall, ain't no Kalashnikov.
Yeah. Now, when he went back to Russia and departed, was there a lot of media attention on the U.S. or Russian side? Was there any?
I don't know about. I don't imagine so. I don't know what happened on the Russian end,
Right.
but everything was very low key here. Nobody even knew about.
Yeah, but there were TV cameras.
There were some.
Yeah. It was not
In Russia there was. In Russia there was.
In Russia.
Oh
in
yeah,
Russia.
they covered
yeah,
this.
Yeah, in Russia they filmed it
No,
because
but-
again, Kalashnikov is kind of a national hero.
Right.
You know.
Like
Now, I never saw any televised reports on this. I mean, we were in a
No.
hotel and all that.
Right.
It was
pretty low key.
properly covered, but not overly covered.
The only time it was covered is when he came to get his other star with Putin, give him that star, that auditorium. They filmed us. What was interesting, we didn't want to fly Aeroflot because well, it's not. I don't want this wouldn't do it. So we took a train, which was 17 hours, it was over 20 whatever. So we had this one lady there was with us. I guess it's everybody. She was middle aged and she wasn't polite, but she wasn't nasty. She was sort of distant because I would ask for, they call it chai for tea, and so we didn't pay much attention. So we got off the train and then we went to the auditorium where all the cameras were.
Right.
Where Putin was going to present him with the star, and Jim Land made him an honorary NRA life member. He was on stage. So they filmed. I didn't know they filmed us, but apparently they did.
Right.
So then they took us to another club, another group of people, which was smaller, with his personal friends. We're sitting. They want to know how we wanted to be announced. Well, they came to me. I said, just say I'm a hunter. I know what else say. And then we're sitting there. We're up front with him. The ambassador for that area came up and wanted to know who we were. Yeah. And then one of the guards came in and says, "Get back to your seats." Sent him back to the back of the room. So then it got down to where it was his own private club. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
He had the
I
three little
wasn't there
dancers.
at that point.
The three little dancers.
Oh, they were beautiful.
And there was another, his brother, another designer there was his relative.
Victor.
Victor.
That was his son.
His brother.
His son, it was his designer there.
Was it his son?
So I asked Janet if I could take one of them home.
Victor was
I
his
asked
son.
the girls if they wanted to go to America. They said yes. I said, Janet, can I take one home? She said no.
Or as the Russians would say,
So
niet.
it got down to where it's just a small, intimate group for that celebration. So on the way home, we got the same train. We got the same lady. And as we were walking in, she started speaking to us. And I said, what's she saying? Well, we saw you on TV. We saw you on... So we got a hell of a lot better service on the way home because she thought we were celebrities.
Yep. Little did she know.
Yeah.
Every train car in Russia at that time had a, I call her a mother hen.
Like I said,
She kind of runs the little kitchen. She manages the car. She knows everybody. And she makes hot tea for you and all that.
And lump sugar.
And they they were tough ladies, I'll tell you.
And then I'd go into the dining car, and I wanted chicken wings, so I ordered chicken wings.
Gary went like this, right?
He came out with three. I said, well, this ain't gonna do. And then
It's a different-
three half.
It's a different lifestyle. It's just everything's different.
No buffalo sauce either.
No.
Good, but the one that I said, well, that's not enough.
And you also had to learn something about the beer. Being something of an expert, I can tell you this story, that in Russia, they serve the beer in various, what I call calibers. That is,
Concentration of alcohol.
concentrations, 1 through 9.
Wow.
1 through 9. And 1 is our equivalent of light beer, 2. And 9 is like something like a mix between beer and vodka. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think we have a 5 over here, bottle, or a 6 or something. It's
You got to be careful what you order.
Yeah.
You have to learn your numbers early
drink the
on.
wrong one and you're on the floor.
Kalashnikov's favorite drink? What was his
Vodka.
choice?
Vodka. He drank that every day.
Yeah.
Drink it straight.
I can remember clearly we were there for one of the occasions, the festive occasions, and we would pour vodka, and everybody had a shot glass in front of them. And so they would pour vodka, and they would all have a shot. Well, after about 3 of these, I decided that I kind of wanted to slow down. So I filled my glass full of water.
That's what I was doing.
I did too.
And he saw me. Kalashnikov saw me. He said, "Don't do that."
He didn't see me do it, but I did it too.
So he tried to correct the error of my ways.
I don't care what, they always would put on a spread for us wherever we went.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't care what time of day, if there was a meal there, there's going to be bottles of vodka on that table.
They
At
drank it like
breakfast, 24/7. It's always there. And then they had the bottled seltzer water. That's what I was pouring in. You never see me do it. But, I mean, it tastes like fire. I mean, but they always wanted to toast before they do anything. Remember that? And not just one. 3 or 4 or 5, you looped.
one of the reasons they may have been that way is a lot of the water over there out of the tap, if you're in these cities, and even Moscow, it's not potable.
Well, maybe that's a good reason. But I do.
On the dark side, I remember a couple times being in restaurants, and binge drinking was kind of a fad at that time. And here were 3 or 4 young Russian guys, and they had a fifth of vodka, or a liter of vodka, and they would just drink this stuff down
Like water.
and somebody had to take them home, you know?
Yeah.
A lot
I
of
don't know how many potatoes they go
But
through over
again,
there.
different folks, different strokes.
But, I mean, vodka was the main drink.
Ed, I was wondering if you could show us the plaque. I don't think we saw that before.
No, I don't think you did.
Oh, this?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
One of the things we did for this occasion was that my wife, Carol, drew this design.
This T-shirt here.
And it's also,
on the T-shirt.
we had a bunch of T-shirts made for the occasion.
And we all wore these.
We all wore those. Carol then came up with this design, and we had it copied onto a sheet, and we put it at Norva. And we wanted to give this as kind of a memento, one for Kalashnikov and one for Stoner. So after the dinner one evening, we brought these out. Kalashnikov and Stoner signed them, and everyone that attended the dinner also signed.
Oh, wow.
And then at the end of that, we gave one copy to Kalashnikov.
Which is in a museum over there.
And that copy is now in the museum in Edzell in Russia.
Dedicated to him.
The second copy was supposed to go to Stoner. Well, Stoner didn't have room in his luggage or whatever. So Edzell said, I'll get it to him, don't worry. Chapter 2. Edzell dies, and I'm helping his wife clean out the house. And in the house, we find this.
He never gave it to Stoner.
He never got around to sending it to Stoner. So I kept it.
We should hang a copy of that.
Pardon?
We should hang a copy of that.
And here it is.
Well, we should. I'll get one.
After all, my wife did design it. I figure I had something.
I think we'll get a copy of this, and we'll put it up in the cabin.
And yeah,
It'd be a nice thing to have.
And Stoner at this point, I think, was in heaven, I think. And so I felt,
Yeah.
I didn't want to see it go to waste, so I kept it.
Yeah, they want to throw it away.
Anyway, it's got the names of all that attended that evening. Many of them, sad to say,
Be surprised how many of them
are not with
are
us
deceased.
anymore.
That's right.
but their warm memory is.
Of course.
So
Stoner and Kalashnikov both passed.
we did good. Anyway, that's what that is.
It is. I'm going to get copies made, and we'll definitely get one and frame it and hang it up in the lodge. I think that would be nice.
And somebody's going to try to take it. Eric, somebody's going to try to take it down.
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately, Dr. Edzell passed away in 1993 before the Small Arms video project could be completed. The silver lining was that Kalashnikov made new friends in America and was able to share his experiences firsthand in a post-Cold War world, and an opportunity that wasn't very likely before. After Kalashnikov's first visit to America, he was invited back numerous times in the 1990s, partially out of his newfound celebrity status. On his second trip in 1991, he met other firearms designers like Bill Ruger, attended conferences, and participated in various exhibitions. With the Cold War being over, Kalashnikov turned to new commercial ambitions, trying to sell hunting-style AK-47 rifles and outdoor gear produced by the Edzell Machine Works company, who Kalashnikov had worked for his entire professional career. The constant attention from reporters and fans during his public appearance took a health toll on Kalashnikov, who, until the fall of the Iron Curtain, was not used to constant questions and interest in his personal life. On Kalashnikov's seventh and final visit to the United States in October 1998, he took the opportunity to pay his respects to Dr. Edzell and Eugene Stoner, who are both buried at the Quantico National Cemetery. Eugene Stoner passed away in 1997, only 7 years after meeting Kalashnikov here. On this final trip to the United States in 1998, he was again accompanied by his daughter Elena, and this time with his grandson Igor. Kalashnikov visited the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, George Washington's Mount Vernon, Alexandria, and the National Rifle Museum in Fairfax, Virginia. He also met Israeli arms designer Uzi Gal at an Army weapons exhibition. Another notable part of this trip that Kalashnikov mentions in his memoirs was visiting the private collection of Alan Kors, who owns one of the largest collections of private tanks in the world at his farm in Nokesville, Virginia. Once a year, they open it up to the general public, where they operate military vehicles and put on a show. Kalashnikov went there on his final trip, where they actually painted his name on the side of one of the T-34 tanks. He got to go inside one of them, and he said it brought back many memories from 1941 when he was part of a tank crew during World War II. He also signed numerous people's AK-47 rifles, and again, lived up to his celebrity status. Kalashnikov, the man, was hardly known to the world outside of his name being attached to his weapon before visiting the United States and meeting with Eugene Stoner in 1990. He passed away in December of 2013, closing a chapter in the long history of firearms development.
Ну, отлично. Я с удовольствием. Я пожалел патроны. Еще мог бы стрелять.
I could have shot and shot.
We noticed.
Yeah, right, great. Они заметили, говорит, что вы...
Я в азарт вошел. Ну что ж, очень хорошо. Спасибо, что вы организовали такую стрельбу. Спасибо. Спасибо. Спасибо, что такую стрельбу организовали. Очень. Вот. Спасибо большое. Я с удовольствием пострелял, поэтому благодарю вас за оказанное.
Thank you, man.
I wonder if Marty has some fish ready for it.
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Gnawing
It's
feeling.
time for trout, I think.
Пора для форели наступила.